What's going on, guys? It's your boy Cash, and we are here at the loveliness that is the create a deck menu. But anyway, what I wanted to do today is that I wanted to go over a few traps that I found, mostly continuous traps, because I found one honorable mention as a normal trap, and the rest of them were continuous traps that I thought that I would bring to you guys' attention, because I think a lot of people might not really know about these cards. Something you will. I did purposely try to avoid traps that you guys have already probably seen before, probably in an Eldritch deck, probably in some other weird decks that you've already seen. These are mostly, some of them are old, some of them are newer cards, but I promise you, you might not know. There's 34 of these cards, and I'm going to go through them relatively quickly, but more importantly, most of these cards go into any deck. They just annoy the opponent, or they help you out in some way. You don't really have to put it in, and most of them, as you can see, are R or N cards. Some of them are SR, and some of them are UR. Some of them are tech specifically for like one or two. If it's a weird card, it's because I just thought it would be funny, but it's mostly to help you guys out. If you want to throw one card in there that might finish out your deck, or one card that might tech out the meta, maybe so. We all know what the meta is currently right now. You got a lot of Eldritch, you got a lot of Drytron, you got a lot of weird stuff going on, and you know, if you take the first turn, you know, this could be very helpful to you. Or if they don't have enough spell and trap destruction, leaving one of these cards out on the field could actually benefit you greatly. So I'm just gonna go over a couple of them, and hopefully you guys enjoy. And if you do, please leave a like and subscribe on the channel. It would mean a billion, a trillion, billion, a jillion much to the boy, you know. So first one that you can see right there on the screen is non-aggression area. Now this card is dirty. This card is super dirty, but it does take a little long to actually activate, because you can activate it on your standby phase, which obviously you would put it down, then they would take a turn, then next time in your turn, then you get the activated. But if you happen to get it off, I just thought it was a nice to mention, right? Because it is a nice trap that if it sits there for a while, you actually will screw over the opponent, because discard one card from your hand, your opponents cannot on their next turn normal summon, set, or special summon during their turn. It's a little bit a long one, but I thought it was something to just mention. I mean, maybe it could be going to Trap Tricks deck, maybe it can go into a Paleozoic deck, you know, stuff like that. Like some of these, like I said, are going to be really weird picks, and some of that, like if you already look at the next one, I saw this and I was like, that'd be funny. I don't think the meta right now actually really cares for dragons that much, but it's just a nice thing to know. If they do ever come up with a dragon meta, hey, there is actually a card that will literally force them into defense position, and they're kind of stuck there. And I think that, you know, again, these are what the kind of cards that I'm trying to talk about, is that you might not know they exist, and they might actually help you out. And if there is a card that I miss or that you think is pretty good, like I said, most of these are going to be continuous traps, but if there is one, please let me know in the comment section below. And if there's one that you want, I'm going to probably try to do the normal traps, all the normal traps. I'll probably do all the spell cards that you might not know about, stuff like that. So the next one is going to be Royal Decree. And outside of screwing up half the cards in this list, everyone knows that Eldritch is very, very popular right now. So being able to stop them in their tracks from activating and just negating all trap effects actually would be pretty good. And if your deck, especially Royal Decree, is really good in decks that aren't trap heavy, it's a one-off tech card, and if you could see, it's an SR, and also keep in mind of the rarities of some of these. If you have the ability, why not throw it in? It would literally save you from that deck. Yes, eventually Eldritch would come out from the grave and then destroy it. If you do put it out initially, it will stop it for a little bit. This one is kind of a funny one, Appropriate. Why? Because activate when your opponent draws a card outside of their draw phase. After that, each time your opponent draws a card outside of the draw phase, you draw 2 cards. Now, I feel like they can deck you out, but it's just kind of a funny thing. Like again, it's like kind of like the non-aggression area. It's something that you would put down a little bit later. They start drawing like crazy, then you get to draw like crazy. If you're running a bunch of hand traps, this could be really beneficial to you. Now, I know a lot of hand traps you can only use once per turn, but you could get them out of your deck, and this is like a funnier way to put it out there. And again, it's just nice to have. It's a R rarity, so if you think that the meta is a lot of drawing, I think they don't necessarily draw cards, they kind of get them from the deck, or they put something from the deck to the graveyard or something like that. But if the meta is draw heavy, this is a good card to help you get your hand traps and then start to disrupt stuff with your Call by the Graves and your Ash Blossoms and all the other ones. I just think that it's a nice thing to mention. Next one is going to be the Regulation of Tribe. There's a bunch of cards that kind of do something like this, but I thought it would be pretty funny just to mention it. Now, activate this card by declaring one monster type. Monsters of that type cannot declare attacks. Once per turn during your standby phase, tribute one monster or destroy this card. Now, Obviously, it's kind of like a negate trap thing, not a negate monster thing. A lot of monsters are within a theme, and you would pop this up pretty much during the battle phase or the beginning of the battle phase, and you would just say, well, what monster types you got out there? Yeah, they can't attack. It's very similar to, what is it, like the True Kings effect, only partial of it. They can still activate effects, they can still ping these cards, but I thought it would be a nice thing to mention just to know that there is a card at an N rarity that kind of does that same effect that you can just slap down and kind of screw up and save yourself a turn. Respect play. The Gentleman's Handshake. I thought that this is just a funny card. During their respective turns, each player must show their opponent their hand. Again, not a biggie, but I just thought it would be funny because then you could see what's in their hand on their turn, and then if you maybe have a way to strip before your turn comes up. But I thought it would be a nice to mention seeing your opponent's hand, being able to know exactly what's in their hand. I think that there's something to that a little bit, just a tad bit. Is it really that good? No, don't actually make this card. I just thought it was funny to add. Next up, Skull Invitation, old school, baby. Each time a card is sent to the graveyard, inflict 300 damage. I should actually be popping up like this. I'm so sorry. Each time a card is sent to the graveyard, inflict 300 damage to its owner for each card sent. Now, the reason why I'm picking this card is because of the fact that I feel like a opponent would end up losing a bunch of life points because of all the combinations and stuff that they're doing, constantly sending cards to the graveyard to link summon, synchro summon. I think that, and then this would even include, let's say, an XD summon, and they throw 2 materials. It says for each card, so it's not like each instance, but each card that they send, and it could rack up on them. I actually think that some burn decks might want to tuck this card in there, because since you set it, and as soon as you draw, you put your the auto response, you put on. As soon as they draw a card, as soon as they start the turn, you just put that out. If they play a spell card, it goes to the graveyard. They take it 300. I just think that it's a pretty interesting card, and obviously it doesn't matter how many of these you activate. So if you have 2 of these out, that's 600 per card that goes to the graveyard. I feel like some burn decks that actually run this because of people cycling through their decks to get one card that might destroy a trap or something like that, and I think that by that time they might be screwed. Next up is going to be this card. Now this card is actually old school, when it used to be the S'more deck, I think it was, with Horus, I think it was. So pretty much both players must set a spell card before activating them. So it's really good if you were to do the same thing I just said before, is that you activate this immediately, so they can't Harpies Feather Dust you, they can't Lightning Storm you from the beginning of the turn. They have to set it and then activate it the next turn, and then you can have other cards that benefit off of that. It's just a really nice dimension card because it slows down a lot of decks that are more spell heavy or that do need that one spell to kind of help them out. You just kind of shut that down completely. And again, it's usually because you don't have too many spells in your hand. And if Sky Strikers did become, I know it's one of the top tier decks, but if it did, it would slow them down like immediately. Like they would be ridiculously screwed by this trap. And it's an SR, a little bit hefty on it, but hey, nice to mention. Fairy Box. Now this card is old school, baby. When your opponent monster declares an attack, it doesn't have to be on a monster. You toss a coin and call it. If you call it right, the attacking monster's attack becomes 0 at the end of the battle, until the end of the battle phase. During each of your standby phase, you pipe 500, which is not that bad compared to how much damage you can mitigate with this card, and then you destroy the card. I used to love Fairy Box. It used to be a staple in every single deck that I used to make back in the day. Obviously, I added a couple cards that have to do with attacking, but you don't want to wait that long. I feel like most of the cards, the ones that are really good, are the ones that you can activate immediately on your opponent's turn after taking the first turn. But if it does come down that they don't destroy this, and you know, I've watched a lot of Eldritch deck, and I see that people don't have too much spell trap destruction, so I thought that this was a good one to mention, because literally they can attack your monster, you call a coin flip, get it right, and then boom, their monster dies. Not only do they die, they take the full brunt of the damage. And there are also other weird decks you can make with this when you force your opponent to attack into you. So just thought I would mention it because it is in the game, and now it's restricted to none. There's a lot of weird cards in here that are old school, that are not restricted to anything. I love this card, Ordeal of the Traveler. When an opponent monster declares an attack, your opponent chooses one random card in your hand, which kind of sucks because you're giving them information what's in your hand, calls the type of the card. If they call it wrong, monster, trap, or a spell, you return the attacking monster to the hand. I love this card because there's no cost to keep it on the field. 2, it returns the card to the hand, and sometimes that's returning a synchro or, you know, any of the extra deck back into them, so they have to resummon it. It's usually cause a hassle. And if you have a decent variety of cards in your hand, and when you use a card like this, you would specifically keep weird cards, like you keep a trap in your hand or something like that, just to throw them off, just to fuck with them a little bit. You know, it's an interesting card. Like I said, you just activate it and there's no repercussions for it to keep it out or for them to have to keep guessing. So I just like it. Thought it would be nice to mention. This card is more of a weird tech card that I added in there because the control of all monsters on the field returns to the owner. Now, what does this card mean? I feel like it's a UR for the wrong reasons, but what this card was, it was like take you a lava golem, and then now there's the kaiju, a lot of kaiju cards and other cards that you pretty much can summon to the other opponent's side. You remove their monster from the field and then it comes back to you, and now you're using it. And I just thought it was an interesting mention because I know it's in the game, and I just thought it would be nice to let people know, hey, if you are running that type of deck and you want to remove their cards, they're big bad, they're Zeus that they just summoned, not only do you take their card, but you also you take their card and then you also get the card back. It's just a really funny way, and I don't know if there's any other decks to really work with this, but if there are, hey, let me know. Next up is going to be Beyond Knave, and it's a very similar thing to what the other one thing that I was talking about. If they happen to leave this card in the field, as soon as they attack, if they're about to inflict battle damage to a player, you return that monster to the hand. This is actually a really funny little card, and if you can mitigate damage so you don't take too much damage, or if you know you take a direct attack, their monster goes back to their hand. In most decks, that's kind of annoying because usually they have taken some time to summon some things, and it could be a interesting way. And again, this card is a R, and like the last couple ones that I've done Untitled Brainwashing are R's. They're very easy to craft, and it's not, the crafting cost is not too high. Next up is this one, which this used to be restricted to one. I really like this one. Again, it's a trap. It's a negating attack kind of thing. Now you activate it by paying multiples of 1,000 life points. Monsters your opponent controls cannot attack if their attack is less or equal to the amount that you pay. So normally what this was is that if your hand was kind of doo-doo but you got the Wall of Revealing Light, it used to be restricted to one. You would literally pay like 4,000 life points. Very similar to like a Solemn Judgment, right? If you Solemn Judgment something right in the beginning, you're paying 4,000. You could pay this, and if your opponent doesn't have a way of removing it, most of the time, if you pay about 3,000, they can't attack you. It's very hard to get over that, and if they do get over it, only that one monster can attack you. So it really usually stalls like a Swarmish type of deck. Certain cards that have a lot of time, again, hard times dealing with continuous traps or stuff that's on the field, and that's obviously the theme of the majority of stuff here. Now this one I do like as well. While you control a monster, you take no damage. Spirit Barrier was more popular with cards that cannot be destroyed by battle, and also since they can't be destroyed by battle, you can take no battle damage from them, so you can leave them in attack position. It's really good for cards that are annoying and they'll actually just stay on the field, and they have effects that are better when they're on the field. Maybe they have an effect that they keep stacking certain things, so you just don't want them to, you don't want to take damage while they're sitting there. Not that crazy of a card, but I thought I'd mention it since it's on R. Then we have this bad boy. Good old Greed. I just thought that this card was hilarious when I was reading and looking through. Each time a player draws a card because of a card effect, they take 500 damage during the end phase for each card drawn by the card effect. This is kind of synonymous with the whole thing of the Skull Invitation. It's an R card, and it's a card that you can kind of like let your opponent kind of screw themselves up. And it only has to do with them drawing from a card effect, so obviously it has nothing to do with their standard draw. But if they do draw a couple cards per turn, and you could stack this obviously by having multiple greeds, they take 1,000 per card. And in the funniest like realm I would love to see once, you have this card for some reason on turn one, they don't kill it or whatever. The dream, this is the dream, they max see you. And you summon a ton of cards and you force them to lose by greed. I don't know, I'd pay to see that almost. It would just be so funny to just see them just literally lose the game because of you activated greed, they max seed, and you special summon a bunch of cards and force them to lose the game. I just thought that'd be funny. I don't think you could really add this card in that many decks, but it'd be hilarious. Chain Burst. I like this card. It just seemed pretty interesting. Each time a player activates a trap, they take 1,000 damage immediately after it resolves. This card specifically I thought would be a really good Eldritch counter, but unfortunately probably as soon as they activate it, they lose 1,000, but then they'll probably target this card out. But if they do use the Conquistador to take this card out, they still take the 1,000 because when it's activated, not when it resolves, keep in mind. Immediately after it resolves this, that's when they take the 1,000. But it happens when it activates. But I think it should still trigger. But even still, they would have to waste it on this card and not maybe a bigger threat on the field. And if not, if there are other trap decks, like I know there is some trap checks running around, it is a nice tech card I think that you could throw in there if you're starting to see something more often that has to deal with traps, and they would take a bunch of damage while you're just kind of chilling. Where you're just kind of chilling while they're having to balance their life points. Versus, you know, they're trying to think, oh, should I really activate that? It's gonna cost me. Next up is gonna be Astral Barrier. This card is very tricky to use. If your opponent monster attacks a monster you control, you can make the attack direct. This allows you to kind of save your monsters on the field. You obviously take more damage. Time you then could just mitigate it in some way, shape, or form. Maybe there's a way you can mitigate the damage a little bit, like with the Spirit Barrier, or maybe you have other ways of doing it, but it lets you keep your monsters on the field, so then you can follow up the next turn after the battle phase, after the turn ends. You kept your monsters on the field, and now you can start to do some wacky stuff. So that's why I think it's a pretty decent trap that, you know, might not have known to use it. Macrocosmos is just here because of the fact that it does remove every single card. Instead of it going to the graveyard, it gets banished instead. And a lot of decks right now don't have ways of dealing with it, as you saw with the Dimensional Fissure. Now, Dimensional Fissure only does monsters. This card does every card. So it does mess up like some LD, it will mess up the LD deck, it will mess up Sky Strikers, it will mess up any card that like throws stuff to the graveyard, and people are like, oh, like it's in the graveyard, I can special summon again. No. Macrocosmos, as soon as they draw a card in their draw phase, and they have to start dealing with this card immediately, or most of their combos aren't going to work at all. So this is a really good card. It is an SR. That's why I did the Fissure. Fissure I think is an R card. But if you do have and you want to start messing around, I do think that this card is pretty nasty. And yes, it has the whole thing with the Helios, Primordial. Yeah, you probably don't need to do that. But I thought it'd be interesting to mention. Next up, by order of the Emperor, when a monster effect is activated, that a monster effect that activates when a monster is normal summon, you can negate the activation. Then the player's effect activation was negated, you can draw a card. Now, the cool thing about this card is that if they normal summon something and you know it's a really pivotal combo piece, you pretty much away the negation of that card versus them drawing one additional card, them getting something probably specifically they want, because most normal summons get them a specific card, and then they just draw one card that may not be good. Also, what's cool about this is that you can activate it and negate your own card. Let's say if your card's normal summon you think is trash, you can just negate it and to draw one card yourself. So I just thought it'd be nice. It is an end card, so it is what it is. Summon limit. We did see this in another duel in one of my spectates, and I thought it was a really interesting card to mention. Neither player can summon more than 2 times per turn. Negated summons do count towards it. Negated cards in effect that would summon do not. So what they're saying is that if you normal summon and someone negates it for some reason, Solemn Judgments it or whatever, that still counts. But if you activate Call of the Haunted and they negated Call of the Haunted, that does not count because the card was actually never summoned in the first place. But this really restricts a lot of decks, because usually they normal summon and special summon, and then they try to do their third summon, which would be the XEs or the synchro, and then it literally doesn't happen. Literally doesn't happen. So they can't do it. They're kind of stuck there. I saw this in an Eldritch deck, and I thought that this was really good actually in almost any deck, especially Eldritch is really better obviously for it because they can take it out when they need to actually break the limit. So really good card, and I really hate that some of these cards will be good for Eldritch decks, and I'm like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't make this video. Next up, I've seen this card in the storyline. I just thought it was a nice thing to mention. All level 6 or higher special summon monsters on the field cannot declare attacks or activate their effects. This one obviously fantastic. It stops a lot of stuff on the field, though there are a ton of extra deck monsters that will now not have levels because they're linked or XZ'd or whatever, but you know, certain decks could, depending on it. Again, this is very meta dependent. If there's meta where the cards are actually more on the field and this would pretty much stop them in their tracks, why not add it? It is an R, so it's very easy to craft. Imperial Custom, face up continuous trap cannot be destroyed by battle. What? I know why it says destroy by battle, because a lot of cards turn into trap cards, right? Or card effects. So this is something, if you do decide to go with a lot of these little weird continuous traps, yeah, you can protect them. But it's when your traps, some of your traps turn into monsters, they can't be destroyed by battles. That's why that card exists as well. Next up is the Stygian Dirge. Reduce the levels of all monsters your opponent controls by 1. This is more of a tech against XEs and Synchros. If you want to disrupt that, if you're noticing that they're kind of becoming too popular, this card really messes up your opponent trying to do stuff like that. Luckily, that's why they kind of have link summons to kind of bypass that. But again, when I saw it, I thought it would be a really good card to mention to kind of throw people off. Vanity's Emptiness. This card is restricted to 1, so it must be popular, right? Neither player can special summon. easy, right? If a card is sent from the deck or field to the graveyard, destroy this card. So you can get around it, right? But it means you would have to normal summon something or activate a spell or a trap. So it's like it's kind of is easy to get the card off the field, but it does force the opponent to do something first in order to get around it. I'm not exactly sure is if you like a card is sent from the deck or the field to the graveyard. I think that this is countered by just playing a spell, and then when the spell goes to the graveyard, you're good. But the spell itself can't special summon anything because it would negate that. So it'd have to be like a spell that does, you know, virtually nothing, which is still pretty hard. It's a very annoying card to deal with, but it does put a hamper on people. It is a UR, and you know, that's the thing, right? So it's not the easiest card to obtain or that you might want to craft, but I thought it's an honorable mention. Next up is going to be Royal Prison. Neither player can special summon monsters from the graveyard. Easy clap, especially if you, one, don't do that. Two, if you just want to throw it out there because you notice that your opponent, or you feel in the meta the opponent is special summoning too much from the graveyard, you just throw this card out. They can't do it. Similar to the other one, but at least you can still do your special summon from the extra deck. As long as you don't have to deal with the graveyard as much, you're going to be clean and easy, baby. Next up is going to be Soul Drain. Not Skill Drain, but Soul Drain. But it's the same thing. As you can see, it's the same guy in the background. Activate by paying 1,000. Monsters that are banished, as well as monsters in the graveyard, cannot activate their effects. This card obviously is really good for shutting down anything that, instead of a monster coming back from the graveyard, they can't even activate that effect. So a little bit different about getting a monster from the grave, but this one is shutting them down because a lot of times there are decks that revolve around that. Again, just a meta tech. You know, Skill Drain works with them on the field. This one cancels them out when they're in the graveyard or banished. So it's about negating stuff where it matters. Right now, obviously, the field, that's why Skill Drain is so good. The field is one of the best places to negate effects from. Then we have Mind Drain. This is the other one. As you can see, here he is again. 1,000 life points. Neither player can activate effects from monsters in the hand. This will actually, if you were to play this very early, they can't hand trap you anymore. You can't hand trap either, but they can't hand trap. So I think it's a really interesting thing, like, to lock that out, and then, you know, it might make it a little bit safer. The hood's a little bit more safer, but then depending on your deck, you have to obviously make sure that you're not using too much stuff. Like my Math Mech deck uses a lot of cards from the hand, monster effects from the hand. So you just got to be careful of what you're actually trying to do in your deck. Let's see. Next up, Castle of Dragon Souls. Wait, I didn't mean to add this. What are you doing in there? That probably means I was supposed to put a card in, and then I didn't for some reason. Hey, you guys, you said you would find the other cards that I missed anyway. Spiritual Swords of Revealing Light. I like this one. Again, it's an attack negation, but once per turn, you can literally, if your opponent declares attack, you can pay 1,000 and just negate it. A little bit different from the wall, because if they have multiple attacking cards, you have to pay it multiple times. But I do like it because if they only have 2, you just pay 2, and then hopefully the next turn you can turn the tides. But during your opponent's turn, you can banish this card from your graveyard this turn. Your opponent's monster cannot attack directly. So if they happen to deal with it, it actually has a graveyard effect, which I think is pretty nice, which literally, like, if you have no monsters, they can't attack that turn, so it's another stall. It's like a two-way stall card, and I think it's really good. And I like traps and effects that have additional effects when they're not actually on the field, and you can just pop it on a turn like, haha, I gotcha. So I think this card's really good. It is unfortunately an SR. Now this one is very weird, Fraud Freeze. Now it does have some Flower Guardian. Like I said, I tried to avoid any specific card types, but I do think the first part is pretty good. Once per turn, when your opponent special summons a monster from their hand, except during the dance step, you can return to the hand all monsters your opponent controls that were special summoned from the hand. So it's really cool about this is that if they do, depending on the deck, maybe if they're going to do it multiple times from their hand, you can wait until you think the last one's going to come out, and then all of them will go back to the hand. And a lot of the times, a lot of monsters, they can only special summon or use their effect once. Or if you see one and you're just like, and you just bounce it back to the hand, it stays in the hand. Now the next part is if neither player controls a Flower Guardian Synchro monster, send this card to the graveyard. So if you're not running that deck, it goes back. But I do think the first part of it is pretty nice. So you use it initially as, you pretty much use it as a normal trap, if that makes any sense. I was reading it and I thought it was pretty interesting. Toll Hike. I thought this card is hilarious. So each player must send one card from their hand to the graveyard to declare an attack. Again, one of those cards that if it stays down on the field, it would be very annoying. A lot of times, the reason why I think this card is great is because a lot of the times after they did all their special summoning, they usually don't have much cards in their hands. And even when they do, let's say they do one good attack, they don't lose, then they're gonna have to keep a card in their hand to declare an attack. This card is dirty, man. And again, if your deck either is stalling based, or maybe you're stalling for time and you just want to put like a face down card at the discard a card from the hand just to attack, I just think it's a very interesting card that is an R that can really stall out matches. And again, it's all about whether or not they can take the card out with a magic and trap destruction. So this is one of those ones where it's like after they blew their entire hand, they got one card, they can only attack with that one card. And most of the time, there's not too many decks. There's a few where they can OHKO you with one card. It's just usually not that's the case. Usually they're attacking with 3 or so monsters, but most of the time, I would say, you guys can let me know, they probably don't have 3 monsters in their hand, or sorry, not monsters, but 3 cards in their hand to discard afterwards. So it is what it is. You could definitely stall some duels with this, in my personal opinion. Next up is going to be Crackdown. Now, I've seen this card in certain decks, but not that many. This card's busted. Activate by targeting one face-up monster your opponent controls. Take control of it. Bow. While you control that monster, it cannot attack or activate its effects. When that monster leaves the field, destroy this card. This is literally a overpowered change of heart. Not only do you keep the monster, by the way, it can't activate its effects, but that still means you can link summon it. You can use it for like food, link food, synchro food, whatever. And you just take their monster, and it's a trap, so you could do it on their turn. It's a really strong card. I think that this card, I've seen it in certain decks, so I think most people are somewhat aware of it. But in case you weren't, because I don't see it when I'm playing against people, I don't see anyone activate. I literally have not seen this card. I've seen it in a couple like public search decks, but I just wanted to bring it to people's attention. This card is beyond busted. You literally take their card, and if that card, let's say they summon some big bad thing and it doesn't have negates or something like that, or if you're really familiar with the deck that you're fighting against and you know, oh, I'm just gonna take that card right now, and it goes straight to your field, and now you're just chilling. Unless they have Maroon Braid Frost, which is the other UR I was talking about. But I do think that this card is really, really strong, especially because, like I said, you can take someone's big bad. It can't attack or activate effects. I think it's really strong. And last but not least, oh yeah. Okay, this is the last one. During your turn, negate the effects of all face-up monsters your opponent controls. And then during your opponent's turn, all your face-up cards are negated. Again, one of those cards where I think like it is a nice to have, you know, not the best card, especially I think an LD deck would maybe benefit more from this than anything else, because they can again ping they can send the card from the field kind of when they want to. So I do think that it's a little bit dangerous, but if you need to push some damage or something like that, I do think it's an honorable mention as well. So that is all the traps, mostly continuous traps that I thought of. And like I said, if you guys have any normal traps that I think I should look over, do you guys have any continuous spells or spells that are really good and that are not as popular, something that you may already like have seen and you're like, oh, someone used that in a duel and I thought it was pretty good. That's gonna be it for me. If you guys liked the video, you like the list that I had all concocted, please leave a like and share the video. I would really appreciate it. And till next time, see you guys in the next one. Peace.